Shinies in Pokemon Scarlet are awesome, but they're really hard to find, and Game Freak even made some impossible. Until now. I used a mod to break the shiny luck in Pokemon Scarlet, so I wanted to see if I could take over Paldea using only shiny Pokemon, with a sparkling set of additional rules to push my shimmering squad to their limits. Will we rise to the top, or will we fail to shine? Let's find out. It wasn't long before I found myself at the starter Pokemon, and even though hunting for a starter will take me ages seeing as how long these cutscenes are, I still went for it. I decided to hunt for a shiny Fuecoco, because, well, Fuecoco's awesome. It was an easy choice. I started off really motivated, but I was losing faith in the shiny unlock even working, because 14 hours in, I was still empty-handed. But after another 10 hours, totaling up to 29 hours and nearly 3,200 encounters, I finally found myself a shiny Fuecoco. Even though I found him at slightly under odds, it still took me nearly a week to find this guy. So if you appreciate the effort, please leave a like and subscribe, because this is the hardest shiny hunt I've ever done. It wasn't long before I ran into Koraidon, and although it wasn't a beautiful shiny Pokemon quite yet, I have something special prepared for later. Right now, I had a bigger challenge on my plate, which was taking on this Houndoom. Wait a minute, how is this battle fair? No! Normally, when playing a Pokemon game for over 29 hours, you've pretty much beat the game. But let alone making it to the first gym, I was barely able to beat my first rival. Thankfully, I did have an easier challenge up next, facing Katie at Paldea's first gym. First up, my Fuecoco was faced with Nimble, and one Incinerate was more than enough to knock it out. Tarantula somehow managed to survive a hit at just a sliver of health, and hit back with an Assurance. But the only thing it assured was my victory, as her attack only did 6 damage. Last but not least was Katie's Teddiursa. One Incinerate wasn't enough to KO, but even after terastallizing, Teddiursa's Fury Swipes weren't too deadly. It did however go first on the next turn, and although Fury Swipes could have been deadly here had they hit 5 times, it for some reason chose to go for a Fury Cutter, letting me get off an easy KO right after, earning me my very first gym badge. Now, even though that battle wasn't too hard, if my Fuecoco would have been KO'd, there was no way I was gonna hunt for another one. So, playing it as safe as I could, I started my next shiny hunt. Before I had time to get started though, Fuecoco started evolving, turning into a beautiful shiny Crocalor. By the way, this was actually my first time playing Pokemon Scarlet, so I really had no idea how the game worked. I really wanted to get comfortable with the map though, so I spent the next 5 hours familiarizing myself with Paldea's region. And on my journey, I actually ended up finding a shiny Growlithe. There was just one problem though. It was over the first Titan's level cap. It was a shiny Pokemon though, so I couldn't really complain. And thankfully, it was an easy catch. I called my shiny Growlithe Mustard and continued on my journey. I had no chance beating Titan Clough with just my Crocalor, so I had to start my next hunt. But as I technically wasn't even hunting for my last shiny, I really didn't mind. I found myself at South Province Area 4, where I must have run into a level 16 Pokemon because I was stupid enough to spend the next 3.5 hours of my life here before finding myself a shiny Toxel, which actually is an amazing Pokemon, but once again over the level cap, and not just over this level cap, but over the next one too. I of course did still catch her and called her Mary Rose. I've so far found 2 shinies, but neither of them are actually from Paldea, and I actually know nothing about Paldean shinies, so I want you guys to let me know in the comments down below what your favorite Paldean shiny is. I was understandably pretty frustrated at this point. I technically already had 3 shiny Pokemon, but only one of them was usable, so I played it as safe as I could and looked for my 4th shiny Pokemon in South Province Area 2. And thank Arceus, it only took me 45 minutes until I finally finally found a usable encounter in Shiny Hoppip. I caught him and called him Guacamole. I think this has to be the happiest anybody has ever been to catch a Shiny Hoppip, but I didn't care because it meant I was finally able to progress in this run. Okay, let's not pretend here. Hoppip kinda sucks, so I still wasn't quite ready to face Titan Cloth. I spent the next 30 minutes of my life looking for the Energy Ball TM, which I would need for Hoppip to be able to inflict any damage at all, after which I was finally ready to take on my very first Titan. Cloth's Rock Tomb would have been absolutely deadly to Guac's flying typing, but for some reason it hit me with a barely effective Rock Smash, letting me get off a heavy hitting Energy Ball. Whoever made Cloth's AI needs to be fired, because it yet again spared me by going for another Rock Smash, and just one more Energy Ball was enough for me to beat it. After a quick heal up, it was time to face Cloth for the second time. My heart skipped a beat when I saw Cloth go for a Rock Tomb, but for some odd reason, it aimed the shot at Arven Shelder, letting me get off a free Energy Ball. On the next turn, it went for a block on the Shelder, meaning we would both get off another set of super effective special moves. This activated Cloth's Anger Shell though, meaning any hit from this guy would be deadly, but this time I was able to attack first and knock it out with one last Energy Ball. You just know the AI is bad when you manage to lose to a Hoppip. As the level cap now increased, I finally unlocked my boxed shiny Pokemon, or at least one of them. I could have swept through the second gym with Crocalor, but I wanted to see Mustard in battle for the first time, and boy did the shiny not disappoint, at least aesthetically. I started off by going for a Howl, to which Petilil retaliated with a Mega Drain, which was not very effective. An attack boosted Flame Wheel was more than enough to take out the Petilil. Smoliv was my next foe, and even though she would have been an easy KO, I went for a Howl to set up well for the upcoming Sudowoodo, while Smoliv went for a Tackle. I went for a final Howl, after which Smoliv managed to get off a critical hit, leaving Mustard at just 20 health. So I decided to finish her off with a Flame Wheel. Sudowoodo was up next, and although I went for an attack boosted Flame Wheel, it somehow wasn't enough to KO, and I knew it was over for me, as Sudowoodo went for a Terastallization boosted Trailblaze? What? I swear this guy has Rock Throw. Well, for some reason Mustard was spared, tanking the shot and being left at just 5 health. Sudowoodo's speed was increased though, meaning it would be able to outspeed me, so I had to switch out into Crocalor, and yet again it went for another Trailblaze, doing basically no damage. Brassius finally got his head straight and chose to go for a Rock Throw, but it wasn't nearly enough to KO, as one final Incinerate wiped out his team, earning me my second gym badge. Watching this battle was clearly exciting for Guac too, as he evolved into a Skiploom right after. Now, when I mentioned earlier it was my first time playing this game, I really wasn't kidding, as without doing any further leveling or preparation, I accidentally took on the Open Sky Titan, Bombardier. I should have really done my research. Well, there was nothing more I could do than to cross my fingers and pray that I didn't lose the run here. Mustard was first up, but I didn't think he'd be able to hurt the Titan much, so I sent out Mary into battle for the first time, whose shiny sprite is surprisingly amazing. She did a decent job tanking the Bombardier's Pluck, but it was clear this was gonna be an uphill battle. Toxel was hit by a Rock Throw, and by the grace of God, she survived on just 4 health, hitting the Bombardier with a Nuzzle, not doing much damage, but paralyzing it, which was crucial. I swapped out into Crocalor, and thankfully the Bombardier wasn't able to hit. I went for an Incinerate, which did decent damage, while the Bombardier was yet again unable to move. My next hit left it at less than half health, but it was able to get off a Rock Throw, which took out around a third of Crocalor's HP. After my next Incinerate, Bombardier's wing attack had no chance of KOing, so I was able to get off one last hit and made the bird flee. I was hoping and praying that I'd be able to go and level up here, but no, nope, we went right back into battle. After Mustard's Intimidate went off, Bombardier went for a Rock Throw. Luckily on Arven's Knackley though, while I was able to get off a Flame Wheel and Knackley hit the Titan with a massive smackdown. Bombardier finally diverted its attention to Mustard and hit him down to just 22 health with one wing attack, while my retaliation was not enough to KO it. I knew I had to switch out here, and it was basically a death sentence to whoever I sent out next. So Guac, I'm sorry, because Bombardier went for a wing attack against the Knackley. Okay, what's going on? Why are these Titans so dumb? I think that triggered the bird, because it went for a super effective Rock Throw next, leaving me at just 10 health. Well, I couldn't complain, as I went for a Fairy Wind with Guac to finish this stupid bird off once and for all. I really have to stop being reckless, or this run is not gonna end well. Anyways, I took on Team Star's Giacomo without preparation. He started off with a Pawniard, who barely scratched my Crocodile with an aerial ace, after which one Incinerate was more than enough to finish it off. His Reveroom was gonna be a really tough battle though. After getting hit by a Snarl, I went for a Snarl of my own to harshly lower its special attack. Wicked Torque did a lot of damage, but I was still able to get off another Snarl comfortably. At this point, it was too risky to stay in, so I sent out Mustard to get off an Intimidate, but ended up getting hit by a crit right off the bat. Now, this kinda put a dent in my plan, but this was still winnable. I switched back out into Crocodile on the next turn, but got hit by a Metal Sound, which forced me to switch into Mary Rose. She was able to get off a Nuzzle, which I thought would have paralyzed the Reveroom, but yet again, my lack of knowledge in this game really let me down, as I was starting to get into big trouble. I wasn't exactly sure what to do here anymore, so I sent out Guacamole and once again messed up by going for a pointless Sleep Powder. Well, it was yet another switch out for me, as I sent out Mustard to get off an Intimidation. After getting hit by a Snarl, literally every single one of my Pokemon was left on low health, and I had barely done any damage to the Starmobile, so I had to start hammering at its health with Play Rough. The Starmobile luckily missed its Snarl, letting me get off 3 Play Roughs, which let me seriously help take down some of its health. I was forced to switch out though because of its Metal Sound, so I sent out Guacamole, whose Energy Ball was weak, but I needed any damage I could get at this point. I went back into Mustard, praying that the Reveroom would go for a Snarl, and thankfully it did. This let me tank its Wicked Torque and finish it off with a final Play Rough. I wish I could say I did more research on the game to prepare for future battles, but there are a lot more mistakes to come. I did not learn my lesson. My journey took me to Levincia next, where Nemona tried to sneak a win in, but was absolutely destroyed by Mustard's flamethrowers. I then somehow found myself in a live stream for the first time in a while. What should I say? Ready to do my best. Yeah, I think that explains why I make YouTube videos and not streams. Wait, why are there in real life stream snipers? Or as I like to call them, stalkers. I have no idea, but I was ready to face Iono in battle, sending out Mustard to wipe out her watch roll in just one flamethrower. Bellybolt was up next, and this guy was way tankier, as he was able to tank a flamethrower, after which his Electromorphosis let him charge up a super tanky Spark. Luckily, it didn't paralyze, and the next hit was more than enough to KO it. Luxio was up next, and to my relief, Mustard was able to one-hit it, leaving Iono with her last Pokemon, a Terastallized Misdreavus, who started off by going for a Confuse Ray. I was thankfully able to hit through it, and get in some decent damage with a Flamethrower. I didn't want to risk hitting myself in confusion, so I sent out Crocodile, who was able to tank a Hex pretty well. I was then confused again, but yet again able to hit through, leaving the Mismagius in KO range from another Flamethrower. After tanking a Hex and getting confused for the 3rd time, I was able to go for one final Flamethrower and wipe out Iono. In front of her, around 7 fans. That gym battle was way too close for comfort though, so I set my sights on the vast horizons of Paldea, and it took me a while, but after around 3,300 encounters, I found myself a shiny Steenie. shiny. Her shiny purple accents were super cool, and even though I already had a grass type, this was a definite upgrade. Welcome to the team, Chimichurri. Now, a grass type was cool and all, but it really didn't add much variety to my team, so I took off yet again, and after over 5,000 encounters, I came across a shiny Donphan. Finally something new. I caught him and called him HP. With this Tusk Terror on my team, I was confident enough to take on my next challenge, Mela. As she leads with Torkoal, it was the perfect time to test out HP in battle, and boy does his sprite look great. I went for a Bulldoze on the Torkoal, which did some great damage, and after easily tanking a Flame Wheel, I wiped it out with another Bulldoze. Reverum was up next, and after getting hit by a Screech, my Bulldoze did some good damage. I couldn't risk staying in though with lower defense, so I sent out Mustard for an Intimidate, which worked out great, because his Blazing Torque barely scratched me. I swapped back out into HP, but somehow almost got KO'd by an Overheat, so I was forced to send Mustard back out, and even though it went for an Overheat again, it literally did less than 10 damage, so I was comfortable staying in. Reverum hit me with a Screech, after which my Crunch did barely any damage. I once again did not want to risk staying in, so I sent out Crocodile, who avoided his Screech. This was the perfect opportunity to stay in and go for a Leer. I then went back into Mustard for the last time and destroyed the Starmobile with a couple more crunches. I wasted no time and headed straight for my next challenge, Totem Earthworm, who wasn't much of a fight as he went down to just 2 flamethrowers. Cascarapagem was my next struggle, and I wasn't quite ready for it at the moment, so I took my Steenie out for some training, and it wasn't long till she evolved into a beautiful shiny Tsarina. Guacamole was also inspired by that Evo and decided to become a Jumpluff right after. Okay, screw it, it's a team event. Mary, you can evolve too. With a shiny amped form Toxtricity on my team, there was nothing that could stop me, so wasting no time, I took my 2 new grass types and 1 new electric type to take on the water type gym. This should be easy, right? Well, let's find out. I sent out Mary first, who was able to KO Veluza in just 1 Thunderbolt. Wugtrio was my next foe, so I sent out Chimichurri to take him on. Not only to check out her sick sprite in battle, but to take it out in just 1 Drop Kick. I stayed in to face his ace, Crabominable, and I'll admit, it was kinda risky staying in, but I was able to get off a super hard-hitting Drop Kick, leaving it at around 1/3 of its health. I wanted to give all my new Evos some spotlight, so I sent out Guac, who actually managed to avoid the incoming slam. Not that it mattered much though, as just 1 energy ball was more than enough to KO the crab and defeat the water type gym. A team star boss was looming ahead, so I had to do a couple of preparations by grabbing myself some TMs, after which I tested my luck taking on Atticus. I started off by going for a tearful look on the Skuntank, or 5 of them, until he was out of sucker punches, and then swiftly took it out in just 2 Thunderbolts, facing Atticus's Reverum at nearly full health. I sent out HP to tank Reverum's Bulldoze, after which I went for just 1 Stomping Tantrum, and that was more than enough to KO the Reverum. Muck tried causing some havoc with a Sludge Wave, but after just 1 hit, his time on the battlefield was over. Last up was his Starmobile, which was not much of a threat. Spinout did barely any damage, while Stomping Tantrum did over 1/3 of its health. The next Spinout though left me at just 4 health, and I wasn't fully confident I could outspeed it, so I sent out Mary to finish the job. 1 Thunderbolt was not enough to KO. The Reverum's Flame Charge barely just tickled me, so I went for 1 final hit to knock it out. I was getting really hungry after all that fighting, so I bought myself some grilled rice, which made me... Hi? Okay, what the fuck? Actually, give me just 1 more. After coming back to my senses, I realized that the rice had triggered something in Crocodile, because right after, he evolved into a shiny Skeledirge. Since it's my first time playing Scarlet, I didn't really know what to expect, but I had heard that this guy is super good, so I naturally wanted to try him out in battle, and the next gym leader, Larry, was the perfect battle for that. I sent out Skeledirge to face his Komala and hit it with a Leer. Now, the plan here was to not not fall asleep to Komala's yawn, so as I switched into Mary, I hit it with a Nuzzle to get off a paralysis. She once again goes for a yawn, which prompts me to switch back into a Skeledirge. I repeated my move with another Leer, and you guessed it, I got hit by a yawn. She tried to sucker punch me here, but I kept on going with Leer and fell asleep right after. Larry then tries to sucker punch a sleeping Pokemon multiple times in a row. He must have enjoyed a little too much of that grilled rice before this battle. Skeledirge finally woke up and managed to Leer the Komala again. We pretty much repeated this cycle until Komala was at -6 defense, and that's when I went for my first Torch Song. Now, I didn't KO it, but after one more cycle of yawns, I was able to take it out at full health and have +2 special attack. I went for a Torch Song against Larry's the Dunsparce too. It unfortunately wasn't enough to KO, which let it hit me with a glare, leaving me paralyzed, and this was bad news. On my next turn, I realized Skeledirge was slower than the Dunsparce and got hit by a Drill Run right off the bat, after which I couldn't even strike back because of paralysis. After the next Drill Run, I was left at low health, but thankfully was still able to finish it off. Staraptor was my next foe, and although it terastallized, I was still confident I could tank a hit, which of course had to be a critical one, but as we barely managed to survive, I struck back with one final Torch Song and finished Larry off. Nemona tried to face me after this, but just like Larry fell, Torch Song was more than enough to wipe her Meowscarada out. Even though I had uncovered one of the strongest moves in the game, in Torch Song, I still thought my team could use a little more beefing up, so I buckled up and got ready for another shiny hunt, and this one was my most painful one by far. Okay, well, after the starter, I made my way to Dali Zappa Passage and started my mission. Now, there were a lot of cool Pokemon on this route, so honestly, I would have been happy with anything. And after around 1,600 encounters, from the corner of my eye, I spotted a shiny Snorunt. I was surprised at how well the Baby Blue suited it, so I was super happy with the find. I couldn't wait to add him to the team. All I'd have to do is hit it with a Shadow Ball to bring it to low health. It was a crit. Oh my fuck. So, there I was, running back and forth in this cave again, and this time I wasn't so lucky. It literally took me nearly 5,900 more encounters to find my next shiny, but honestly, I couldn't really complain because it ended up being a shiny Dano. Even though she really wouldn't be a viable choice until way later in the game, I was still super stoked about this find, and thankfully I didn't end up KOing it this time. Welcome to the team, Charmula. Rhyme was never gonna be a real challenge, so I took her duo on with Skeledirge and Mary. After Skeledirge got hit by a Shadow Sneak from Mimikyu and a Sucker Punch from Banette, I struck back with a Shadow Ball, KOing the Banette in one hit. I chose to Nuzzle with Mary, which would both leave Mimikyu paralyzed and break its disguise simultaneously. Mimikyu's next Shadow Sneak left Skeledirge pretty low, but in retaliation, my Shadow Ball managed to KO Houndstone in one hit, and Thunderbolt left Mimikyu at a sliver of health. Toxtricity was last up from Rhyme, and I didn't want to take any risks staying in with Skeledirge, so I swapped him out for Chimichurri and finished Mimikyu off with a Shadow Ball. Toxtricity tried terastallizing on the next turn, but it was too little too late, as in just a couple of moves, it was game over for the Ghost-type gym leader. Great Tusk was waiting for me next in the Asado Desert, and Chimichurri was the perfect Pokemon to start with. After hitting it with a super effective Trap Kick and lowering its attack, I sent out Mustard to get a further Intimidate, and at this point, its Brick Break was doing barely any damage, but just to play it extra safe, I sent out Guak, who tanked a Rapid Spin with ease. One Energy Ball left the oversized Dumbfan at low health, and the next, well, that was overkill. I did the same with Arven and took out Paldea's 4th Titan. I then found this weird stake in the ground and pulled it out. I wonder if this will come in handy later. I literally spent the next 30 minutes trying to play Just Dance Pokemon Edition and somehow kept failing over and over again. I knew I should have taken ballet lessons when I was younger. Well, I eventually passed the test and was able to take on Tulip and her Farigiraffe. I led with Skeledirge and started off my chain of Torch Songs. It did hit back with a powerful crunch though, and although I was really hoping for my next Torch Song to KO, it was left on red health and managed to hit me back with a crunch, leaving Skeledirge with less than half health. My third hit was enough to KO though, and this gave me a well-needed special attack boost. Espathra was my next foe, and I had to risk staying in here. I was left at just 4 health, but thankfully was able to survive a Shadow Ball and get off a one-hit KO with my own Shadow Ball. Gardevoir was way too much of a risk to try and hit, so I swapped out into HP, who unfortunately got hit really hard by her, and I had to switch right back out again. Guac was thankfully able to tank a Dazzling Gleam with ease, and I was able to hit it with an Acrobatics. After getting left at just 10 health from a Psychic, I had to take the risk and stay in here, and so I went for another Acrobatics, and somehow it was enough to KO. Once again, that was way too close for comfort. I definitely had to switch out here after putting Florges to sleep with a Sleep Powder. I sent out Mustard next, and although Florges woke up, Psychic did do less than half health, so I was comfortable going for a Crunch, which thankfully ended up being a crit. Mustard tanked another Psychic, being left at just 9 health, but this was just enough to go for one last Crunch and take out the 7th gym leader. I didn't want to waste any time and took on Grusha right after, which was perhaps the most free battle in this run so far. A Torch Song was more than enough to take out her Frostmoth. Beartic, well, Setitan did need 2 hits, but Altaria fell to just 1 too, and that's how I earned myself my 8th and final gem badge. Team Stars Ortega was my next challenge, and I took him on with Mary Rose. One Thunderbolt was easily enough to KO his Azumarill, and Wigglytuff nearly fell to 1 Poison Jab too. Her Body Slam did not hit too hard, and 1 more Poison Jab sealed the deal. Dashbun was up next, and after getting hit by a Mud Slap, I went for a heavy-hitting Overdrive, which left it pretty low. The next Mud Slap lowered my accuracy even more, and this time I unfortunately missed my move, and this forced me to send in Guac in fear of getting KO'd. Guacamole tanked the Crunch pretty well, but got his defense lowered in the process. Energy Ball was enough to finish off the dog though. Last but definitely not least was the Rush Bus Starmobile, and I sent out Mustard to intimidate it. Its Steel Roller did next to no damage, so I confidently stayed in, and after getting confused, I went for a Flamethrower, which honestly didn't do too much damage. I then swapped out into Skeledirge, who tanked a Magical Torque like it was nothing. After getting hit by a Confuse Ray, I went for a series of Torch Songs, and it wasn't long before the Starmobile was knocked out. After this, I found myself at the edge of a cliff and let my intrusive thoughts win as I jumped off the edge and glided all the way down to Dondozo, who I was almost able to one-hit KO. Tatsugiri was up next, and it started off with an Icy Wind, which barely did any damage, but neither did Overdrive. It would have been hard to take this guy down alone, but with the help of Arven, we knocked that out in no time. With the level cap increased high enough, it was finally time to bring out Chimichurri onto the team, and it evolved right into Azwilas. Well, he went back into the box for now, but soon he'll be unstoppable. Before that though, I had the biggest task ahead of me so far, the Elite Four. Rika was up first, and I decided to lead with Guacamole. I was more than confident an Energy Ball would KO, and it easily did. Camerupt was my next foe, and her fire typing was obviously gonna be a challenge here, so I swapped out into Skeledirge, who got hit by a Yawn. I didn't want to fall asleep and get wrecked by an Earth Power, so I sent Guac right back out, but she somehow predicted this and yawned again. I tried something different on my next turn and went for a Sleep Powder on Camerupt, but I ended up missing and got hit by a massive Fire Blast, surviving on just 6 health and falling asleep to the Yawn on the same turn. I did not have a good start here, so I sent out Skeledirge to tank the next Fire Blast, and thankfully I was able to avoid it. I decided to copy the Camerupt and go for a Yawn myself, after which I sent out Guac to tank the Earth Power. Since the Camerupt would fall asleep on the next turn, I used this chance to send out HP and go for an Earthquake, which actually ended up being a critical hit and finished him off in 1 move. I was met with HP's objectively uglier twin afterwards, and decided to hammer it with an Earthquake, to which she responded with an Earthquake. How original. May the better Dawn fan win, which was obviously mine, as my next Earthquake was enough to earn the KO. Dugtrio was my next victim, and for some reason, it decided to go for a Sandstorm to set up Sand against a ground type. Smart thinking there, pal. You can probably guess what an Earthquake did to that guy. Rika sent out a Clodsire as her ace and terrestrialized, fast. Just one Earthquake managed to cut down over half of its health, while Clodzire's Earthquake in retaliation didn't even manage to KO, even though it was a critical hit. At this point, it was game over for Rika as one final Earthquake ended this battle off. Puppy was the second Elite Four member and is a lot scarier than she looks. Copperajah is her first Pokemon, and I absolutely obliterated it with Mustard's Flamethrower. Bronzong was up next, and I hit it with a Flamethrower, which once again knocked it out in one hit. I wasn't really worried about her Corviknight, but it somehow managed to tank my Flamethrower on just 1 health, but thankfully it ended up getting burned, which not only halved the damage of Brave Bird, but knocked the bird out of the sky at the end of the turn. Magnezone was Puppy's second to last Pokemon, and managed to live through a Flamethrower thanks to its sturdy. It set up a Light Screen, which ended up being the last thing it would do, as an Extreme Speed knocked it out right after. Tinkaton was last up, and after I hit it with a pretty weak Flamethrower, I was hit with a critical hit Stone Edge. Being left at just 21 health, I knew I had to swap out here, HP being the obvious choice. Stone Edge literally only dealt 15 hit points of damage, and Gigaton Hammer barely hits HP for half health, after which a super effective Earthquake was enough to finish this battle off. Okay, maybe she wasn't so scary after all. Larry was up next, and he definitely wanted revenge after how I embarrassed him during our last encounter, and had upgraded his team to host a Tropius? Okay, I'm not exactly sure that's an upgrade, but either way, Mary's Gunk Shot was an easy KO. Oricorio was next up, and I hit it with a Punk Rock boosted Boom Burst, which demolished it in one hit. Altaria was gonna be a little more challenging, so after tanking a Dragon Pulse, I went for a Boom Burst, which did a lot of damage, but did force me to switch out into Skeledirge next, who resisted a Dragon Pulse pretty well. I was outsped and hit by yet another Dragon Pulse, this time being a critical hit, but thankfully it wasn't too bad, and my Shadow Ball was enough to finish it off. Staraptor was never gonna be an easy battle, especially at pretty low health, so I swapped out into Mustard for the Intimidate. He tanked the Brave Bird pretty well, but it was clear he was not gonna last long in battle, so I had to hit Staraptor with a Flamethrower, which, even though it didn't KO, left the Staraptor burned, meaning the next Brave Bird barely scratched me, and the burn was enough to finish it off right after. Flamigo was Larry's new ace, and I had to send out Guac here to protect Mustard, and it was clearly the right choice as Flamigo ended up going for a close combat. Due to Flamigo's lower defense, I went for an Acrobatics against it, which did a decent chunk of damage, but it retaliated with a Brave Bird, which ended up being a critical hit and knocked out my first Pokemon in this run. Rest in peace, Guac, you did amazing. I knew I had to get revenge on Flamigo, so I sent out Mustard to finish the battle off, and one Flamethrower did just that. Now, even though we were hit with our first death, this wasn't the absolute worst news ever, as I was finally able to let Chimichurri join the team. Last up, I had my fourth Elite Four challenger in Hassel. He led with Noivern while I sent out HP. I luckily managed to avoid the Super Fang, while a quite effective Ice Spinner was more than enough for the KO. Dragalge was up next, and a stab boosted Earthquake was easily enough to finish it off. Flapple also fell to a single Ice Spinner, and while Haxorus was able to fight back with a couple of Dragon Claws, HP still easily secured the KO. This battle was looking good so far, but it was about to take a turn for the worse. Baxcalibur was sent out, and as there was no way HP was living through a hit, I had to swap out into Mustard here, who tanked an Icicle Crash like it was nothing. I hit it with a super effective Play Rough, but his Glaive Rush left me low, and as 2 hits were not going to be enough for the KO, I once again had to swap out. I sent out Chimichurri, ready to swap out into Skeledirge right after, but got hit by a critical hit, and was knocked out instantly. You did your best, Chimichurri. Unlucky. I then sent out Mustard to get off another Intimidate, and then sent out Mary to try and do some more damage, but Glaive Rush was just hitting way too hard for me to retaliate. I sent out Skeledirge next, and thankfully, he was able to tank the next hit pretty well. Even though I wasn't faster, I was still bulky enough to resist a couple more hits, so after a couple of shadow balls, it was game over. Finally, it was time to take on La Primera. I sent out Mustard to face her Espathra. I was hit with a Lumina crash right off the bat, which didn't do too much damage, but halved his special defense, leaving Mustard super vulnerable. I did hit back with a super effective crunch though, which did loads of damage. I was able to take it out on the next turn, but not without being left at just 16 health. Avalugg was my next foe, and I was able to burn through it with a single flamethrower. I crossed my fingers as I hit King Gambit with a flamethrower, and even though I was able to leave it burned, it still finished off Mustard with an iron head. You did your best, pal. Thanks for everything. I sent out Mary to get my revenge, and finished off the King Gambits with an overdrive. I was faced with a Go-Goat next, but I wasn't too worried here and started setting up with a shift gear. A Zen headbutt hit back hard though, so on the next turn, I had to secure the KO with a poison jab. Geeta then thought the best course of action was to send out a water type Pokemon. I hate to tell you this, but it sure wasn't. Last but definitely not least was her Glimora. I wasn't sure what to do here, and I ended up deciding to go for a Brick Break. And even though it was super effective, it unfortunately wasn't enough to KO, and Mary got knocked out by the following Earth Power. You did great, Mary. I then sent out HP to save the day as he knocked out Glimora in just one Earthquake. I managed to beat the Elite Four and Champion, but lost 4 party members in the process, and this run isn't even close to being over. There's more challenging battles to come, but with half a team in my party, I had to make some serious improvements if I wanted a chance to beat this run. I started off by evolving Charmula into a Hydreigon, and this guy not only looked amazing, but was gonna be an absolute beast in battle. This wasn't gonna be enough though, so after making my way into Area 0, I started my hunt for a prized shiny Paradox Pokemon, and I was way over odds down in these caves for almost 6,500 encounters, until finally I found myself a shiny Screamtail. I caught it and called it Rosatella. With this Paradox Pokemon on my team, I was confident I could take on AI Seda, so that's exactly where I headed to next. Seda led with a Slitherwing while I sent out Skeleturge. I was hit with a Zen Headbutt, which really didn't do much damage, and I hit it back with a super effective Torch Song. My next hit was enough to KO, and now that my special attack was doubled, I was ready for her Brute Bonnet, and as I predicted, Torch Song was an easy KO. Sandy Shocks was up next, and its Earth Power would have obliterated me, so I had to swap out into Charmula and try her out in battle for the first time. I then started setting up with Dragon Dance and Nasty Plot, and although Seda tried its best to hurt me, my setup was just way too strong, and a Dragon Pulse easily wiped out Sandy Shocks. Screamtail came out next, and I was horrified at how much objectively uglier and worse it was than mine, so I had to make quick work of it. Fluttermane was also decimated by a single Dark Pulse, and last up, I was faced with a Roaring Moon. This guy would honestly be a real threat to my team, had I not committed to the biggest setup of all time. Dragon Pulse finished it off like it was nothing, and just like that, I had taken down Professor Seda. Now, there was still one last battle for me to take on in the DLC before this run is over, and like I promised earlier, I was ready to start my hunt for a shiny legendary Pokemon to make sure I wouldn't fail on my very last fight. So after re-entering Area 0 and setting my save in front of Koraidon, I realized that this encounter had already been generated, and there was no way I was gonna be able to find it as a shiny, as I no longer had a save state far back enough to before Koraidon stats were generated. So I went with the next best option. Remember the stake I found earlier? Well, it was finally time to put it to use, as after spending the next 30 minutes finding the rest of the stakes, I set my save state in front of the shrine and started my very final shiny hunt for the legendary Pokemon Chien-Pao. Resetting for this was a long and tedious process, and thankfully I was able to get this guy too under odds. And after around 15 hours of searching, I finally saw some shiny sparkles. Now, even though it doesn't look like a shiny in battle, those sparkles were enough to indicate that it is. I caught it and called it Soy. I'm so happy I went through with this hunt, because, I mean, just look at this guy. After tirelessly working through the entire Teal Mask DLC, I had made it to the very final battle in this challenge, Carmine. And it was time to test out Soy in battle. Even though it was hit by my Tiena's Intimidate, I still wanted to try out a Sacred Sword, and it hits hard, but so did her play rough. Thankfully though, I took her out on my next turn. Ninetales was up next, and I couldn't risk staying in, so I sent out Skeledirge to deal with it. Even a critical hit from it did barely any damage, but neither did my Shadow Ball, and as I stupidly forgot about her Flash Fire, I tried to hit it with a Torch Song, but just ended up boosting her fire power. I knew I had to switch out again, so after hitting Ninetales with a Yawn, I sent out HP. He got hit hard by a Flamethrower, but as Ninetales fell asleep right after, HP was easily able to deal with her with an Earthquake. Leavanny was Carmine's next choice, and I took this opportunity to send out Charmula. I hit her with a Dragon Pulse, but was hit back hard with a super effective X-Scissor. I was able to finish her off on the next turn though. Morpeko was up next, and I completely forgot that it would outspeed Charmula here. So after just one hit, Charmula was knocked out. I knew HP would be able to tank a hit, so I went for an Earthquake, which would have KO'd, if not for the Focus Sash, which I did not know about. At this point, I just had to let it happen and let HP get KO'd. Nice try. This actually hurts so much. I don't think I've ever lost this many shinies in a video before, but thankfully it was almost over. I sent out Rosatella to try and take Morpeko out, but was immobilized by paralysis. On the next turn though, it tanked an Aura Wheel easily and finished Morpeko off with a Hyper Voice. Sinistcha was the last Pokemon I had to face to complete this challenge, and it did not go down without a fight. In just one hit, it was able to KO Rosatella, and I knew it was Soy's time to shine. I went for a super effective Throat Chop and left it on about 1 health, and unfortunately got KO'd in one hit too. If this wasn't the last battle in this run, I would have definitely rage quit by now. I lost nearly everybody, but as usual, Skeledirge did not disappoint, and helped me end this battle off and complete the Nuzlocke. Creating this video took so much time and effort, so if you appreciate this kind of content, please don't forget to press the like button and subscribe. See you later!